is equity? This is from Investopedia, and it also relates to something that you might call an equity firm. It's very well known, I would say, in corporate circles, perhaps not so much in general understanding as far as the overall populace, perhaps. Here it states equity, referred to as shareholders' equity or owners' equity for privately held companies, represents the amount of money that would be returned to a company's shareholders if all of the assets were liquidated and all of the company's debt was paid off in the case of liquidation. In the case of acquisition, it is the value of company sales minus any liabilities owed by the company not transferred with sale. That's one definition of equity in the context of business. Now that is the definition that we need to look at. Also, liquidation, even though it does not appear to define liquidation, liquidation as generally is understood would be the sale of a business's assets in the most in the quickest way possible, right? So the fastest that you can sell a asset is how liquid it is, and the liquidation, of course, would be the sale of all, if not many, most, or whatever, whichever asset is. I guess you don't have to liquefy all of your assets, but yeah, it's basically just a quick sale or as quick as possible. So that is the definition that we're working with in this video. Naturally, you have the use of the word equity associated with many other things, and where we think they're talking about a different definition, which they might even say they are, they're actually not. They're talking about the standard business definition of equity. Here we have, after COP26, putting health and equity at the center of the climate movement. Notice it divides those two words to health and equity, right? This is John M. Balbus, MD, MPHC, Joseph Cannon, AB, Arseneau, Mataka, JD, and Rachel L. Levine, MD. And who knows if any of those people actually exist. As is the National English Journal of Medicine, or no, the New England Journal of Medicine, April 7th, 2022. Downloaded from nejm.org on May 5th, 2024 for personal use only, blah, blah, blah. Participation by the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, in last fall's United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, represents an important milestone in the U.S. health sector's work to protect the health of U.S. residents amidst the climate crisis. As we all know, globalists working on behalf of foreign investors against the interests of the domestic population, who are part of their living assets or livestock. Anyway, by joining the COP26 health program, we made specific commitments to resilience in our communities and decarbonization in our health system. Of course, naturally, we are carbon-based life forms. Decarbonization in a health system, yeah, that's got a rather disturbing objective to it. Anyway, that signal a new era for our agencies, federal healthcare providers, and for stakeholders throughout the healthcare industry. There's that word they love to use a lot, stakeholders. Those are your stockholders. Those are the people who liquefy their assets. Aligned with the Biden administration's goal of achieving a 50 to 52% national reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 and associated commitments to decarbonization of federal facilities and procurement. It would be good to note here one thing. Every time they reference Biden or any other president, what they're referencing is the character, the personality, the name. These people do not follow the directives of any of their personalities. The personalities are simply meant to put a face to something. They follow the directives most of the time of individuals that we will never meet and we will never know exist unless, of course, you do a quite extensive amount of research and analysis and collection and There are various other things that they don't want you doing because they don't want themselves to be found, because they are, in fact, enemies. And naturally, you wouldn't want your enemy to find out who you are. Well, we wouldn't want they know who we are, and they see us, of course, as their assets. But we don't know who they are, and they don't want us finding them out for obvious reasons. Anyway, as well as the administration's focus on racial and social equity. Remember, equity is the amount of assets to be liquidated. These pledges demonstrate the urgency with which we are confronting the single greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. What they mean by global health, of course, is health equity. They are assets to be liquidated. We are strongly encouraged by similar commitments from more than 50 other countries and a vanguard of U.S. private sector organizations, including 19 large health systems. National Academy of Medicine's Action Collaborative on Decarbonizing the U.S. Health Sector, which we co-chair, is also playing a crucial role in convening industry actors to jointly address healthcare's 8.5% contribution to overall U.S. carbon emissions. Yet for all the promise of these declarations, they are so far only aspirations. Questions facing the health sector now is what it will take to turn these goals into reality, given that we are seeking unprecedented change on an unprecedented scale. An inescapable question is how. Part of the answer, we believe, lies in HHS's new Office of Climate Change and Health Equity. There's your word joined. Health equity. That is health assets to be liquefied or liquidated. Created by executive order in January 2021 and launched on August 30th, 2021, the OCCHES mission is to protect the U.S. population from the grave health threats posed by climate change. We are all taught continuously to understand a phrase like that in one way. It means something else. It relates to assets for liquidation, health assets, and especially to protect oppressed and vulnerable groups that already suffer disproportionately from these exposures and will continue to do so without concerted intervention. We intend, there's your buzzword there, intervention, right? Like a UN intervention force, which is a way of nicely saying we're going to come in and send in forces of mercenaries to enforce with arms our edicts, whether you like it or not. We intend to work toward a future in which communities and facilities and buildings thoroughly anticipate both the catastrophic and chronic health consequences of this crisis for the people at greatest risk. They are talking about a specific crisis, by the way, and it's not climate change in the sense of a physical, well, it is a physical climate. It's not climate change, as they would say, global warming, right? It's, well, global warming is something else as well. That's climate change relates to the overall political climate. It has to do entirely with the number of human beings and in what position they find themselves. What is the climate of the economy, for instance, the climate of housing, the climate of work and trade, and the climate of people overall understanding, education climate, right? This is what they mean by climate change. They are going to, as it says, on an unprecedented scale, change the climate. And that is the crisis they're talking about. Not only is it created, but it entirely has to do with changing the climate so that they don't lose. And it also, of course, has to do with the liquidation of health equity. So, in continuation, and in which all organizations that contribute to healthcare's carbon footprint, providers, payers, pharmaceutical suppliers, device makers, group purchasing organizations, and others, publicly and energetically seek to reduce it. So what they're talking about, of course, is reducing the population. We will work through all components of HHS, federal health systems, and other departments across the U.S. government to support and coordinate this critical work. That U.S. government, of course, is a subsidiary of a foreign entity and an enemy of every single human individual that lives in the United States, except, of course, for their minions, because their minions are enemy combatants who are implanted. They're foreign occupiers. Of course, government alone cannot make the massive changes required in the U.S. health sector. What is needed over the next year is the simultaneous mobilization of public and private organizations on multiple fronts. And of course, that's what we're seeing today. It's really not hard to follow. We can start with common aims for decarbonization. That's also depopulation, is what that's called as well. And an adaptation that prioritize the interests of vulnerable populations. So basically, they start first with depopulizing and adapting as their first priority vulnerable populations. And of course, we'll get in, we might, I'm not sure exactly, but they, of course, naturally have their vulnerable populations charted out. And those vulnerable populations primarily include women and children. So that's a priority. Depopulation of women and children, specifically those in vulnerable positions. Hence a reason why they like to destroy the family, separate the male from the family, isolate the female, get them completely and utterly dependent on so-called government and subsidizing their life. Then they can control the mother and the child, and thus prioritize that vulnerable population, single mothers. And then provide a combination of supports and incentives that will ignite and bolster action. And of course, what they're talking about there, ignition, right? Ignition is not generally a term that you use in a peaceful manner. Ignition usually has to do with fire. Igni, of course, being fire in Latin, igni. Ignition is to inflame. So here they're talking about providing supports and incentives to inflame. We've already seen many examples of how they do that. By attending to 4 policy areas, we seek to create a context that is highly conducive to the collaborative action required. It first entails promulgating measures to support transparent reporting on progress towards aims such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which should increasingly become a standard for organizations as they take on this work. Transparent reporting will help us identify bright spots and learn from variation, and it will hold us all to public account. So those bright spots they're talking about, which they use in clearly a negative aspect, has to do with holes or problems that might arise, things that might derail their operation. It could be individuals working within their organization who might have a tendency to abhor, once they figure out what's actually happening, the activities going on, and thus could possibly undermine it. So identification of detractors, that would be a bright spot. Bright spots, of course, in this context refer to, say, anomalies. They want people who will willingly depopulate, to use their nice word, a large portion of their neighbors. It's It's a particularly unnatural state of mind that you would need to have to do something like that. And of course, the school system, as well as many other entities, have been working towards that end for a long time. The hskjd will collaborate with relevant HHS agencies and external organizations to identify clear metrics for assessing greenhouse gas emissions and resilience, with the goal of introducing them as measures of health system quality. We will also help develop measures for supply chain emissions. In addition, we will help to identify straightforward strategies for data collection that do not place an undue burden on providers. All right, so here they're talking about, of course, spine, right? Data collection, the thing that everybody hates, that all of these service providers, right here it just states providers, but service providers collect continuously on people without their consent, without their knowledge, without any of that. Even if it is with their consent or their knowledge, it's usually extorted in some way, such as across the board, you can't access the internet or use any of these systems unless you agree to our phony and completely criminal requirements, of course, listed in hundreds and hundreds of pages that nobody ever reads. And then naturally, supply chain emissions, that is mentioned here, that of course is telling you that they plan to target the supply chain, which we all really know, destroying farms and taking out the meat and milk and eggs and everything else that they can as far as staples when it comes to supply chain, to make, of course, naturally more vulnerable populations, which they can prioritize. Second, we will focus on development of supports for learning and innovation. Many U.S. health systems are still familiarizing themselves with the basics of resilience and decarbonization. Yeah, no crap. That's a pretty evil and difficult mission to carry out, considering the implications of what it means. Improving at speed and at scale will require sharing of best practices among providers, suppliers, states, and countries. The U.S. health sector must efficiently collect new approaches from around the world, distill actionable lessons. Lesion would be a pretty applicable word here. Lessons from each and disseminate them rapidly. HHS has several existing learning networks, e.g. the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Quality Improvement Organizations, QIO, program, and the Hospital Preparedness Program from the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, ASPR. And we are actively exploring ways to introduce content on the health effects of climate change into such programs. That's for understanding. That's not because they actually disparage. Well, to them, it wouldn't be bad health effects. Bad health effects to them would be anything that hits their bottom line when it comes to the liquidation process of their health equity. We will also seek to increase flexibility within the existing innovation and waiver programs so that care providers and communities can experiment with solutions, e.g. funding for cooling assistance for low-income households, that will reduce harm to vulnerable groups. And we will partner with federal research agencies to help expand existing evidence base to guide the health sector's actions. In addition, we are reviewing and improving tools we use to raise awareness about the local health challenges presented by climate variability, e.g. floods, fires, heat waves. And of course, naturally, they're using climate in the sense that we all think they're talking about, but in fact, they're actually talking about the economic climate and health equity, as they've said multiple times using that word, but we are trained to follow along with their sheep programming so that we don't realize exactly what all of this really means. With particular attention to the communities that will be disproportionately affected by them. Particular attention, right? Prioritize vulnerable communities. They're far easier to remove, to liquidate, not necessarily remove, but liquidate. However, that may happen, but later in the video I'll explain a possibility, an idea of how that liquefaction of those health equity might take place. In collaboration with federal partners, our office is developing a bulletin that will provide timely information on upcoming health threats associated with climate change to support greater health system preparedness. Now that we have an understanding of exactly what they mean by climate change, that sentence makes a whole lot more sense than the phony way that they apparently talk about climate change, which is in relation to, as it says there, floods, fires, heat waves. That's not exactly what they're talking about. That sure is a component. That would definitely damage their health equity, right? But that's not the only example of climate change. So-called social unrest would be another climate variability for them. We will also more effectively harvest insights. Who uses that word like that? Somebody obviously talking in code. Harvest insights from communities to inform the agencies that have the resources to enhance their resilience. So basically, they're going to collect from their entities ideas that can better help to implement this liquidation operation of their health equity, as they see it. Third, once we clarify measures and identify evidence-based practices for reducing emissions and promoting sustainability, HHS will explore a variety of incentives, including payment, funding, and recognition that can further fuel improvement throughout the sector. Like they used ignition before, right? And they referenced fires. Well, now they're talking about fuel. Go figure. And fourth, we aim to update relevant HHS regulations, which can help spread new standards of care delivery. We believe that several pertinent regulations, including those related to emergency readiness, would benefit from review and potential updating to ensure that they support healthcare facilities' work on sustainability and climate change resilience. Any such revisions should also remove problematic guidance and unnecessary hindrances to the preparations healthcare systems need to make. Equally, medicines, procedures, and processes that are wasteful or contribute substantially to greenhouse gas emissions should be subject to scrutiny and replacement if safe, effective alternatives exist. We hope that such policies and additional actions to be identified will inspire the sector to address the health threats associated with climate change in an equitable, there's that word there, equitable, that has to do with assets that can be liquidated, not the nonsense that they pretend it means, inclusive manner. In government health agencies, hospital boardrooms, executive offices of major insurers, manufacturers, and suppliers, leaders must fully understand the catastrophic human and financial cost of delayed action and lead the nation in addressing the crisis. The crisis they invent, and they plan, as always, to lead the nation in addressing their crisis that they create. And their crisis they create has to do with human and financial costs, health equity. Anyway, we could read the rest of it, but it is a little bit tedious and is basically saying all the same crap. So let's move on to our next document. The Office of Health Equity, OHE, is located in the CDC immediate office of the director and serves as principal advisor to the CDC director on all health equity matters, domestic and global. In carrying out its mission, OHE implements an agency-wide equity strategy that includes multi-year initiatives that advance comprehensive, well-defined, and measurable health equity outcomes. Coordinates health equity science, including advancing the surveillance health equity indicators in the science of achieving health equity by consistently applying data collection and analysis standards in collaboration with the Office of Public Health Data Surveillance and Technology, as well as the Office of Science. Now that we've clarified what a lot of those words actually mean, it should be a lot easier to demystify, or rather decode, that paragraph right there. Anyway, 3, coordinates programs, practices, policies, and budget decisions across the agency with a health equity lens that includes a comprehensive view of disparities, including race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, rurality, and disability. Now, if you're an investor and you have a diversified portfolio, it's very creepy when we're talking about the health equity angle of a diversified portfolio. That's naturally why they always want to have a variety of different skin colors, ages, sexes, different characteristics to add to the diversity of their health equity. However, when it comes to the unification into an overall standardized structure, that mainly has to do with the ability to control their health equity. If you think about it from the lens of how most people would understand equity as far as it comes to assets and stocks and things like that, if you have a portfolio, which of course means a book, because they can't ever say book or use the word that's much easier to understand, they have to call it a portfolio or use some other nonsense from different languages rather than, translate to English. Well, if you had a variety of different classifications methods contained in the book, if you had different languages in the book, if you had your portfolio set up with various different structuring mechanisms, right? You could have one page that's all color-coded and the next page is all just bullet points, right? That would be a nightmare. Huge mess. Your whole book is complete, is different languages, a different structure, different everything, like it was put together by a committee, right? Naturally, in order to make that a lot easier to manage, you would want across the board a standardized equal structure. That's what they mean when they talk about equality. They want a standardized equal structure in which they can better control their health equity, their assets as they see it, us being their assets. But they also want diversity, as in a diversified portfolio. Anyway, for agency-wide equity initiatives and priorities to build on work accomplished to date and ensure alignment of internal and external efforts to advance health equity. Works in collaboration with CDC's Office of Communications to develop and lead agency-wide communication efforts aimed at increasing awareness, increasing transparency, and fostering a unified understanding of the purpose, importance, and synergy amongst CDC health equity initiatives, and to disseminate scientific and programmatic findings to the public. Like I said, make a standardized structure for their portfolio. Shares best practices, coordinates, and collaborates and collectively advances health equity standards and principles in science programs and in communications with the public and our partners, and leads and supports a health equity approach for emergency response across the agency that includes working with partners to reach communities with large disparities in health needs. And 8, provides and coordinates leadership for the implementation of CDC's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility strategic plan. Basically all the things I just said. Ensuring CDC's workforce, workplace culture, and infrastructure reflect diversity policies, procedures, and practices that support all employees in reaching their full potential so that they may better accomplish CDC's mission and be effective guardians of public health. Equity. They left that part off. Naturally, in California, you have the Business Operations Unit, which I'm sure is one of many. The Business Operations Unit provides business operations support and administrative support to the Office of Health Equity, OHE, in a variety of areas such as quality improvement, procurements, personnel, and facilities management. There's that word again, facilities, as in building. Next, WHO and Global Citizen signed partnership to promote health, fight inequity. Notice it says inequity, not inequality, inequity. That is their important word there. We already did talk about what inequality and equality actually relates to, the standardization of a portfolio. Inequity, of course, naturally relates to assets and liquidation and return on investment, at least their alleged investment. They really don't usually provide anything other than something that was stolen from somebody else, etc. And address health-related risks of climate change. WHO, also known as the World Health Organization, as in who's on first, that nonsense, and, well, at least that's, I imagine, what the joke is there, and international advocacy organization Global Citizen. That name is particularly interesting, by the way, and we'll see why in a little bit. Today signed a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on joint global advocacy initiatives aimed at promoting and protecting health for all people over the next 3 years. The main objectives of the collaboration will be to support global efforts to overcome inequities and millions of people facing accessing health services and attaining the highest levels of physical and mental health, and addressing the health-related challenges posed by climate change. Again, that climate change does not relate only to the physical climate, but also the abstract climate of something like political leanings, they might say, social unrest, etc. Who the United Nations Specialized Agency for Health and Global Citizen, the international advocacy organization working to end extreme poverty. That has another meaning to it as well. Signed a 3-year MOU in Paris at Power Our Planet Live in Paris event held during the Summit for a New Global Financing Pact. This, of course, relates to all the other crap that we read earlier about their initiative to liquidate health equity. WHO and Global Citizen have joined forces on multiple activities in the past, including the international broadcast special One World Together at Home, held at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 to support healthcare workers. And workers in this context, they're using it in the same way as someone might use the word slave, because slave means worker. The event raised almost US $128 million in commitments from corporate partners and philanthropists, and supported efforts of the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund for WHO, powered by the UN Foundation and regional foundations. And also, as a note, as according to all my other videos, these juridic entities are designed to present the appearance and image of an expansive operation while also hiding the individuals behind it. Global citizenship, like any other abstract idea, find its meaning in the everyday actions of people like you and me. For Grand Canyon University, also notice that GC are the first letters for global citizen. The global part of global citizenship begins with the theological idea that we are all God's children. As such, each person is worthy of respect. It may appear overly simplistic, but global citizenship could be nothing more than recognizing beauty, dare I say God's beauty, in difference, traveling and teaching in Central and South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, and in many parts of the United States provided me with a concrete learning experience in global citizenship. So this is what you would call globalism. And that other entity was called Global Citizen, a corporation. So these things are particularly interesting as they relate to each other. Also, it's basically stating here that the idea of being all God's children is a theological idea. And only being God's children is worthy of respect. Nothing else. A lot of people today might be agreeing with that, not realizing that they are agreeing with the same crap written before, that they are all health equity to be liquidated for the return of investment for foreign persons who neither know, care about, well, they care about them only as much as they relate to a balance sheet on paper. Which, of course, sheet is paper, so I suppose that's redundant. Well, sheet could be made of other things. Anyway, that's a digression. So, if you can't figure out the connection here with the global citizens, just understand, well, they're not global citizens, but with that particular term, just understand that this is a foreign operation. It's a foreign enemy operation. Anybody at all in the armed forces has a responsibility and a duty to act against these individuals and operations, but everyone else has a shared self-preservation duty to act against this, unless, of course, they are enemies and minions who believe that they alone will be spared. So, as always, there is more than one way of looking at the word crowd farming, especially as it relates to health equity. The health equity of a crowd would relate to that crowd's ability to provide a return on investment with the liquidated asset of that crowd. Here it states crowd farming, a platform that gives users ownership over land and flora cultivated by a remote farmer. Boy, does this sound like a scam. A remote farmer, huh? Sounds like the Prince of Nigeria. By creating a direct link between producer and consumer. Overproduction and waste are avoided. They hate overproduction and they hate quote-unquote waste. What they like is scarcity and famine. Are avoided and farmers can better plan their harvest while improving their financial security. So, give us all of your money. We'll give you absolute crap for it. And at the same time, we'll go and take over all of your production while you believe that some remote farmer is going to give you a return on investment. That's just like the E-Trade scam where or of course the Prince of Nigeria, the well-known scam of where somebody who's so far distant from you that you don't need to worry about it and you will have very little hope of actually confirming the legitimacy of it. Well, you give them a bunch of money and they'll give you a whole bunch of money back. Yeah, right. So here from livestockwealth.com, we have a simplified explanation, which of course has all these other things, is actually doing something else while telling you a nice lie. Our crowd farming trademark platform connects you with approved farmers. Approved? Sounds like they might be remote. Who already have cows, macadamia trees, and other assets. Well, when you buy the asset, livestock or plant-based, which of course could be human, from the farmer through livestock wealth. Livestock, technically speaking, are plant-based. Well, I don't really want to get into that. The asset grows in the farmer's care. 3, the farmer buys back the asset once it was fully grown at harvest. You, the investor, make a profit from the sale. So yeah, basically the Nigerian prince. And here they've got a nice little circle. Investor, market, farmer, or farmer, investor, market. Whichever way you want to look at that. Either way, it's all a nicely packaged scam as usual, just like the E-Trade scam or the Nigerian farmer scam. The ultimate goal for the liquidation of the human equity, as I see it, or the health equity, can be found in the idea of working someone to the bone. And there's many other ways of talking about this. But essentially today we see a large amount of construction going around everywhere. One of the things that they're constructing is a large number of empty buildings. Now, when the crisis they manufacture, or the climate change that they're really talking about, comes around, there will be a large, and I mean a large, number of displaced workers, a crowd to be farmed, to be harvested. Now, harvesting will probably take place, or at least it's one possibility, by putting them into very criminal and ridiculous agreements for housing. But there won't be any other choice because these people think they control everything, including all the land. So all those people, in order to have a place to live, to take care of their families, to have a livelihood, I've heard this one before. This is the same crap they did in 2020, and they're going to do it, but on a much, much larger scale. All those people will be forced and worked to the bone. Essentially the original concept of slavery as we're taught. And all those people will literally be worked to death until every single amount of equity is extracted from the asset. So to set this ultimate scheme up of health equity investment, we find the foundational structure, organization, whatever you want to call it, in the paperwork. Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education, Bulletin 1918, number 35, Department of the Interior, Bureau of Education report of the Commission on the Reorganization of Secondary Education appointed by the National Education Association, and I've used this document a lot for reference in my other videos. Under contents, here it states the need for reorganization, the goal of education and democracy, the main objectives of education, the role of secondary education in achieving these objectives. That's on page 11. And also on page 11, the first role is health. 1, health. 2, command of fundamental processes. 3, worthy home membership. 4, vocation. 5, civic education. 6, worthy use of leisure. 7, ethical character. Ethical character. The first one, health, I guarantee is missing the word equity. Here under, they use Roman numerals, so that would be 14, I think, XIV. Recognition of the objectives and planning curriculums. No curriculum in the secondary school can be regarded as satisfactory unless it gives due attention to each of the objectives of education outlined herein. Health. As an objective makes imperative an adequate time assignment for physical training and requires science courses properly focused upon personal and community hygiene, the principles of sanitation, and other applications. So, right, all straightforward, right? Live healthy, happy, all that stuff. Except this is coming from the perspective of an investor. While I was in the Marine Corps, often in a contemptuous manner, the same phrase would be repeated that most can find in all of the corporate systems today. Insert blank here has invested thousands, millions, however, whichever large number you want to use, of dollars in training you. You usually use contemptuously. And we, it, whichever insert blank here, will get its money back. I'm sure many have heard this same phrase regurgitated or repeated in some slightly varied manner before, but that's what they're talking about. Here they're investing in your physical health, and they will get their due, as they would say it. Who is going to do this for you? Well, you have the health director. This council member should seek to ascertain whether the health needs of the pupils are adequately met. For this purpose, he should consider the ventilation and sanitation of the building, the provisions for lunch, the posture of pupils, the amount of homework required, the provisions for physical training, and effects of athletics. Sounds like a slave trainer, as only those who have read banned literature would understand, even though a lot of that stuff is incorrectly taught, at least as far as the word slave. The accurate word would be a involuntary, or not involuntary, but rather impressed servant. That is more likely the accurate word for what they're talking about. Slave just means worker. You could be, as in slaving away at something, right? You could be a paid slave or a paid worker. You could be a self-employed, even though that's one of their disgusting words they use. Either way, you could be your own slave, right? And that definitely sounds really weird for current understanding of what that word really means. But the word slave just means worker. An impressed slave is the same as impressed worker. Impressment, naturally, was one of the main reasons for the War of 1812, apparently, and many other things. Impressment is a word that we're not taught because that's what they do. They impress you. They force you to do things against your will and against your best interests, or their interests. So here, that's what they're doing, basically. Also, in continuation, he should find out whether the pupils are having excessive social activities outside of school. Yeah, that's like the impressed workers, or there's so many disturbing implications to that phrase right there. And devise means for gaining cooperation of parents in the proper regulation of work and recreation. That would would not be said better if it came out of the mouth of an alleged mafioso. You may well see whether the teaching of biology is properly focused on hygiene and sanitation. Next, of course, remember the two names of those interesting organizations, the World Health Organization and the Global Citizen. Citizenship Director. The Citizenship Director should determine whether the pupils are developing initiative and the sense of personal responsibility. A sense of personal responsibility. Not actual personal responsibility, but a sense of it. And also developing initiative. So like bringing awareness to things, right? He should foster civic mindedness through the school paper debating society and general school exercises and give suggestions for directing the thinking of pupils to significant problems of the day. Give suggestions for directing the thinking of the pupils. That's called mental programming. It's very criminal and disturbing and can be seen done across the board today. Any individual that is occupying these roles is a particularly heinous enemy of every person that lives on this continent, pretty much every continent around the world. Naturally, when we go to hhs.gov, we find them carrying out those cardinal principles of the health director. Goal 10, improve quality, timeliness, scope, usefulness, and accessibility of data needed for suicide-related surveillance, research, evaluation, and quality improvement, promote and support research on suicide prevention. So naturally, watch for excessive social activities and devise means of gaining cooperation from parents. Those can be changed to be devise means, suicide prevention, and improved quality of data needed would be a way to change watch for excessive social activity. Right? Then we come to the Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion Division, downtown Oahu. Pandemic Response Extension Project, PrEP. PrEP is short for preparation. I mean, the implication there should be obvious. Office of Health Equity Epidemiologist. Exempt, non-civil service, full-time temporary appointment. The purpose of Health Equity OHE is to advance health equity by assessing and monitoring population health and identifying health disparities. So like the cardinal principles, watching for excessive social activities. Engaging stakeholders, or stockholders, to develop policy systems and environmental change improvements to eliminate health inequities. Not inequality, inequity. Inequality relates to the portfolio. Evaluating and monitoring efforts and assessing strategies with the continuous engagement of key stakeholders. Pandemic Response Expansion Project, PrEP, or preparation. OHE epidemiologists will conduct basic epidemiologic functions, including collecting, linking, analyzing, and maintaining surveillance data. Another word for that is called spying, with a focus on improving the collection of health equity data, conducting epidemiological studies, and implementing evaluations. These people are foreign intelligence operatives engaging in operations of intelligence collection. That is the territory of a foreign enemy, adversary, engaging in operations of warfare. Unfortunately, we have had a lot of infiltration into the United States military. But this, for sure, is the most heinous of warfare operations that you could be involved in as far as extensive consequence. A lot of the people that get involved in these things, I have to imagine, are ignorant on some scale of what the implications are of being caught for espionage and high treason. Generally speaking, it would be death. Now, lastly, coming back to the World Health Organization, here it defines what equity is for us. Isn't that nice? Equity is the absence of unfair, avoidable, or remedial differences among groups of people, whether those groups are defined socially, economically, demographically, or geographically, or by dimensions of inequity age, sex, gender, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation. Health is a fundamental human right. Health equity is achieved when everyone can attain their full potential for health and well-being. So here it defines it without defining it, as usual. But if you're reading this and you know what that actually means, then that paragraph makes a lot more sense. Health equity, naturally, as you can see in this context, they are entirely and completely talking about the return on investment. If somebody's sick, the return on investment will come from all the products that they consume to deal with that sickness. If somebody's not sick, then the return on investment will come from the generated revenue by that person's effort over life. Pretty much. And that's the system that we're living in. Your value will be extracted one way or another. As they say, they will get their due. Health and health equity are determined by the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, play, and age, as well as biological determinants. Biological there, of course, they're talking about eugenics or genetical things. Really stupid stuff. Structural determinants, political, legal, and economic, with social norms and institutional processes shape the distribution of power and resources determined by conditions in which people born, grow, live, work, and play, and age. That's how they determine distribution of power and resources. That's what they mean there. That's how they determine it. People's living conditions are often made worse by discrimination, stereotyping, and prejudice based on sex, gender, age, race, ethnicity, or disability. Among other factors, discriminatory practices are often embedded in institutional and systems processes, leading to groups being underrepresented in decision-making at all levels or undeserved. Progressively realizing the right to health means systematically identifying and eliminating inequities resulting from differences in health and overall conditions.